Do you like books? I mean, really, really like books? Then you're in the right place. Each week, your host, Sam Hankin, interviews the best of today's top-selling authors and the up-and-coming superstars of modern literature. This is The Avid Reader. Here is your host, Sam Hankin.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of The Avid Reader, brought to you by Wellington Square Bookshop. Our guest today is Fiona Davis, author of The Spectacular, published June 13th by Dutton. And Fiona is the author of The Magnolia Palace, which is the Frick House, 70th and 5th, The Lions of Fifth Avenue, which is the library at 42nd, Chelsea Girls, Chelsea Hotels at 23rd, and based on my last stay there after it was renovated, I will never stay at another hotel in New York. The Address, which is the Dakota at 72nd, and the Dollhouse, which is the Barbizon at 63rd. So mostly we're uptown. So her articles have appeared in the Wall Street Journal and Oprah, as well as many other periodicals. So Marion Brooks is 19. Is she in love? She's a dance instructor who could have been a great dancer. Her dad, Simon, is loving but strict, and her sister, Judy, doesn't live up to the spectacular, if you will, good looks of her sister. So against the demands of her father and the imploring of her sister, Marion does the unthinkable and auditions for the Rockettes at Radio City and gets the job. At the time of the events in the book, and in her inimitable fashion, Fiona weaves the history of New York with the story that unfolds. And in so doing, we learn of the Mad Bomber, or the Big Apple Bomber, who has terrorized the city for 16 years, planting bombs in various famous venues, including Radio City. 16 years, unsolved. So the plot thickens, and amidst the twists and turns, Marion grows in many ways, including her recognition of what love truly is. And the ending, as usual, is something I can't give away. And my interviews with Fiona will always be tough for me because I dare not contain spoilers in them. Welcome, Fiona. Thanks so much for joining us again.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a thrill to be back.
So we talked about this a little bit before, but tell our audience your love affair with New York and your love affair with the famous buildings of New York.
Yeah, I think deep down, I'm just a snoop by nature. And I'm so curious when you walk by a grand old building, what's it like in the basement, or what were the maids' quarters like? And so for me, the building is an entryway into learning about the past generations of New York City and how they lived and who they loved. And so it's just really fun to focus on one, do a lot of research, and then see what surprises jump out at me that might make a good story. And I like to say I take kind of this, the real structure of the building and how it came to be and what went on within it, and then layer fictional characters on top of that. So you get a really fun ride of a story, but that's set at this important building in New York that is something that it's a gift to open up and see what's inside.
Yeah, and the way you do discover things, it's great for the reader because in the Lions, you find all these secret passages and things that you didn't know were there, for the most part, probably were. And then in Grand Central, the art. And in this book, I had no idea that Radio City had, the dormitory and the cafeteria and those kinds of things. So your research is what led you to find these things out, or did you have an intimation of them before?
No. I really start with, okay, maybe Radio City, let me look into it. And then learning that these dancers there, they live there pretty much almost, round the clock sometimes for 3 or 4 weeks at a time before they even got a week off. And so, because it was a film venue and you had 4 shows a day, you had 4 films and followed by the stage show. And so it's wonderful to talk to people who have these wonderful memories about going to Radio City back when that was the format, because now, of course, it's very different. But as I did the research and learned how much was going on within Radio City, that there was, a poster department, there was a tailor, there was a nurse on staff, there was a lounge, a cafeteria, there was a movie screening room, and then even better, up on the roof, there were shuffleball courts and wiffle ball where the dancers would go up there and hang out in between shows, much to the delight of the workers in the skyscrapers around them. And it just sounded like such a fun place to try and bring to life.
I know you love, you just mentioned a little bit, I know you love talking about the grind of being a Rockette and the kicking and how many there were on each day. Why don't you tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah, so they would do 3 or 4 weeks straight where they'd do 4 shows a day, and then they'd finally get a week off. And yeah, they did a kick line in every show. So that was around 600 kicks per day. And of course, it wasn't just kind of going on stage and dancing, it was precision dancing. So it required strength and technique and skill and flexibility in order to do exactly what the girl on the other side of you are doing. To keep everything perfectly in line required so much control. And I just was amazed by how difficult that job must have been at that point.
It's funny. At first I was thinking, oh, this is showing women in a light where they were controlled or exploited. And then the more I read it, I realized they were their own women. They were actually in charge of their lives.
Yeah, that's so interesting you say that, because that is the first thought is, well, the men were the ones producing and directing it, and then they, showed up and did what they were told. But in fact, the guy who founded it was this guy, Russell Markert, who was a really great guy, a really solid human being. Every Rockette I talked to just had such devotion to him. And he founded the Rockettes in 1925 and was the director and choreographer until he retired in 1971. And he was a real father figure and made them feel safe and secure. And yeah, because of that, this is a time when women, you weren't supposed to be, you're supposed to be a wife or a nurse or a teacher. And instead, here they were dancing on that iconic stage, making good money, living independently. And that was really rare for a woman of that time. So I agree. I think it just shows these women thriving in a way that they couldn't have done otherwise because of society at that time.
Yeah, which also leads me to thinking, which I had no idea about, the rehearsals hall. And the other thing is the way you bring in characters who may only be in for a paragraph or so, like Mrs. Hornsby. It's like, I really like Mrs. Hornsby, but I only know her from 2 paragraphs, basically.
Yeah. It's really fun to populate the book because you start with the main characters and then you realize, oh, I need someone here and I could use someone here to kind of elucidate what this is about. And then suddenly there's this whole population going on. It's like a little village you create.
Yeah, so the rehearsals club.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. And rehearsal club, that was really cool to read about. And that really existed.
Yeah, like the Barbizon. And I think you even, one of the girls compares it to the Barb. Marion does.
Yes. Yeah. Because it was much smaller and it was for women in the performing arts, but it was this wonderful place that a lot of Rockettes stayed at where you could, get room and board and be in a safe environment. And, apparently it was really kind of crazy. The front, the parlor was always filled with dancers and actors, doing their thing. But people like Carol Burnett lived there and Diane Keaton. And it just must have been a really fun place to live if you were looking for somewhere to pursue the performing arts and yet a woman and wanted to still be, in a safe environment. And what's so nice is the rehearsal club is up and running now. It's down on 34th Street and they reopened it. And it's a place where you have to audition to get in. But once you do, you get, a great room and for not too much money, which is hard to find here in the city.
I'll say. Well, I guess we ought to go back a little bit to Marianne at home and her sister and her dad, Simon.
Yeah. It was I gave her a lot of obstacles, I have to say, because she's a dance teacher and she wants to dance professionally, but her father really frowns on it, partly because his wife, and Marion's mother, who's since passed away, was also pursuing a career in the arts and one that he didn't really approve of. And so Marion really has to strike out on her own and is really stuck once she makes that decision. He basically tosses her out. And her sister, of course, is following in the way that most women do, of doing what her father tells her and being the good daughter. And so for Marion to have to be the bad daughter after being the, beloved daughter for a long time, it takes a lot of character to be able to step away from the life that she's almost sucked into. And that would be of a suburban mom.
Yeah, and it's interesting how in the opening section, you talk about, well, she's teaching and then things get out of hand and things get out of hand. But the thing that was interesting is that she's always like, throughout the book, it's almost as if she's too good a dancer. everything. It's almost as if she's too good, but at the same time, she's so good that it would be hard for her to find a place where someone that good could exist.
Yeah, I modeled her after the film star Vera Ellen.
Mm-hmm.
And because apparently she was a Rockette when she was very young, but she didn't last long because she was just too much. If he wanted a kick to be shoulder height, hers would be eye height. She was just bigger than anyone else. And Russell Markert gave her a few weeks to get her act together, but she quit before she got fired. And then went on to this really great film career in White Christmas and all these other movies. And that it struck me because I think in so many things, in corporations or in communities or, within families, there's a point at which you need to kind of suck it up and be part of a team. And especially with the Rockettes, you have to mimic exactly what the person next to you is doing. You have to, keep in line, obey the rules, and do it the way they tell you to. But then what about those moments when you want to break out, right? Or express yourself in some creative way, or you feel there might be something off that you want to address and bring out into the open. And that's so hard to do, whether you're a whistleblower in a corporation, and so I love that contrast, especially in the 50s when conformity was the theme of the decade, I would say. And what happens when someone doesn't want to conform and can't?
Which reminds me of some of the things that I would never know about, like kicking out and the way they tipped and not touching each other. Talk about some of those techniques that they had to learn really, really well, or they would be really embarrassed, like kicking out.
Yeah, it was wonderful to talk to these Rockettes who danced there in the 40s, 50s, 60s and hear their experiences. And I learned that so much of what the Rockettes do is an illusion where, when they're all doing that kick line, it looks like their hands are on each other's backs, but in fact, there's a few inches of space. They're not touching. And, that requires so much control, but I'm guessing that, that way, if one wobbles, it doesn't bring down the whole line, which would be not a good thing. And then kicking out is when you're supposed to kick 8 times. And if someone thinks it's 10 and so hits 9 and everybody else is off onto the next thing, and the thing is back then, the routines were constantly changing depending on what movies were coming in because they were tied with the theme of the movie. So you had to be learning something new all the time. So you not only had to be a great dancer, you had to have a memory and, be able to take these things and memorize them in your body and then forget it. And 2 weeks later, do something completely different on that same stage. So yeah, it was really fun to learn. And about, things like with the wooden soldiers, which is a very famous Christmas number, that apparently in the 40s and 50s, those white pants they wear were so starched, they'd have to stand on a chair and kind of slide into them. It's just those kind of details that I love to uncover.
And it's all the women who must be in their 80s or 90s who told you a lot of these things.
Yes. And they had such vivid memories and they spoke so highly of their experiences. It was really fun to learn, each generation, what traditions they used or, just the little jokes they played on each other. And they all loved their time as Rockettes. They just, the memories were so much fun and really charming.
Yeah, it's funny because I was at my bookstore because I'm so weird. I keep telling them, this is like, you'll never have another job like this, but it's a good start because I'm going to tell you, I don't want you to do less than what I expect or what I expect. I want you to do more than what I expect. And if you do that all your life, you'll have a very good life. And this seems like being a Rockette at 18 or 19 or 20 would be a great foundation for your career and your life.
Oh, I think so, because the discipline involved and learning how to be part of a group. Yeah, I think it must have been just a really fun experience for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and they seemed like they all were nice to each other and cooperated. The only person that wasn't nice was her friend who was trying to get in.
Right, who didn't get cast. Yeah. And that's the thing, everyone I talked to, every Rockette I spoke to, I said, okay, what's the dirt? Like what was going on? Was there anything kind of crazy going on behind the scenes or, any backstabbing? And they all said no, there just wasn't. I think there wasn't time for that kind of thing. They were so busy dancing or rehearsing or sleeping. And B, I think the group that Russell Markert created was just composed of really good people. I think he knew how to spot them.
The going back to her home life, I think probably this doesn't spoil anything. Probably one of the most multifaceted characters in the book is Simon.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. You know, he's in a tough place. And he lives the way a man would in the 50s, where his rule is law and what he says goes, and he expects everyone to do what he says. And you know, he works for a big corporation, and that's what he does as his work. And so he's shocked when his daughter won't. You know, to him, that's just an absolute personal affront. He can't see her point of view at all. And I talked to a couple of Rockettes who said, yeah, their fathers disapproved. Absolutely. And, you know, or they were allowed to do it for 1 year and then that was it. But there were limitations on women for, you know, what you were allowed to do and what you weren't.
I don't know if you did this on purpose, but I was interested in the fact that you always called him Simon. It was never like dad or daddy or father. It was always Simon.
Yeah, you know, it's tough in a book because, you know, you have to refer to him. It's hard to say dad or dad all the time, daddy. Although she does, I think she calls him father sometimes, never daddy.
Yeah.
He's not a daddy. But yeah, in a long book like that, you find that the parents tend to be called, even in the kids' heads, by their real names, just because it's easier, I think, for the reader to keep everybody straight. And also, I think, you know, he is just such a Simon. He's, you know, that I think that's the way she sees him.
And then what you do is and it involves him as well, is you bring in this second story. And also, I always like your author's note because you always say, look, this is not what happened. This is what happened. And then also, and I hate the term rabbit hole, but then after you read the book, you start, which I did, finding everything out about the bomber and what he was called and things like that. But I won't say any of that stuff too, because the note obviously does change your perception afterwards, and you do it in a really nice way. Yeah, so anyway, let's go to the second story. Well, there's other stories too, but let's go to the second story about who the mad bomber was, in your book, the Big Apple bomber was, what he did, and
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
time.
I just love to anchor the book in something that really happened in New York. And when I came across that in 1956, which is when it's set, the police were really ramping up their efforts to find the mad bomber, which was this guy who set 16 years, he set 33 pipe bombs all around New York City, including iconic buildings that we all know and love, like Grand Central and the New York Public Library. And he injured 15 people, some very seriously. And he set 2 at Radio City Music Hall. And the minute I read that, I thought, wow, that's wild, because I've never heard of this bomber. And it found a really wonderful book on it called Incendiary by a guy named Michael Cannell, I don't know how you say it. And that talked all about what it was like, that he was caught finally by using criminal profiling for the very first time. And, you know, that's something that we just take for granted now. And that's what I love, is mining these things that these days we take for granted, and seeing what it was like the very first time. You know, what was it like for a psychiatrist to come up with a profile of this guy? And what was the police reaction? And then, of course, describing it very clearly in the author's note, like you said, because certain things had to be changed just for legal reasons, and just to make it really clear what happened and what not. But for this story, I was so surprised how much really had happened in terms of the Mad Bomber that I could include. It was really fun.
It was also fun, again, talking about the characters that come into the book. All your books are the 2 detectives, and how you made them almost like a TV show, good guy, bad guy thing.
I did. That was fun. I love, you know, it's fun to have those characters because you can really play around with them and have them be, good cop, bad cop, basically.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that you do it on purpose, but the reader is going to immediately be very angry at Ogden, and why doesn't he listen to them? And then you go, Summers seems like a really nice guy, but then you couldn't make him too nice,
right?
Because yeah.
Yes, yeah. And I love reading, you know, thrillers with cops in them. It was fun you know, this is different for me, this book, because there is a little more of a thrill genre in it. And so it was really fun to have a chase scene, to have detectives, just for something to shake up the historical fiction world a little bit.
And it's always like a portmanteau book because, you have dance, you have romance, you have the bomber, you have the father-daughter relationship, and then you have something like Creedmoor, which I knew nothing about, and now I do. And spent a lot of time, which I could have been sleeping, researching it.
So sorry. Yes, I went through the same thing. I figured the readers should suffer as well and go down those rabbit holes. But yeah, the Creedmoor was this big hospital here in Queens and in New York. And had all these iterations as a place where the mentally ill could go. And at first it was a place where they had theater and farms and, a place where you could learn and continue to grow as a human. And then learning that in the 50s, medication just fell into favor. And so it was just full of zombies at that point, of these highly medicated patients. And yeah, to bring that world just to life in a few scenes was really interesting for me.
And then if you go to the romance, and it's something that happens both men and women, but you usually read about it with women because in this case, she has a suitor who's her potential, perhaps, maybe fiance. And then there's another man that comes into play as well. That's where I stay away from the spoilers.
Yes. Yeah. Better to stay away. Yeah. Yeah. But, I think what's fun is to set up a character so that she really, to change her nature, which is what she has to do. She has to change from one type of person into another and become stronger and just, a more well-rounded person in the course of the book. And to do that, you need things that pull her away and things that try and keep her grounded to her old life. So there's a real push and pull between what she wants, and that's to please her parents, her dad, to please her almost fiance. And then this new exciting life, which is just pulling her in with all the lights and, and the stages and the glamorous women that she meets.
Yeah. And the other thing about the other man, Peter, is that as you do in some of your other books, Marion has a specific initial response to him. And then that response.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I love that you catch that. You've read my books well, I can tell. Because it's true. I love the idea of a first impression not quite being what you expect it to be. And then as you learn about someone, that happens all the time in real life, where your first impression is completely off. And you really have to be open to what someone's true nature is and not judged by, your first meeting with them, for sure.
How do you do with that? How are you at judging character? Like within 30 seconds, can you kind of peg somebody, or do you think you can?
Oh, I like to think I can, but probably I'm terrible at it. That's a very good question. Yeah, I think maybe I'm getting better at it as I get older and you meet more people and you can you think, oh yeah, that person's like that person. So that probably means this.
I don't know if I'm getting better at it, but because I'm so old, I just don't care. So if I get it wrong and offend them, they're offended, but I don't think of myself as being offensive. It's just they indeed are offended.
That is the joy of getting older, is that you stop worrying about what everyone's thinking about you. And so your focus is on the outside world and focuses out instead of in, which is so freeing, for sure.
Yeah, it's like when I grow old, I shall wear purple,
Yes, exactly.
So if you were talking about, and I'm sure you're doing this right now, and we talked about it a little bit because I was thinking to myself, and I always do because I count your books, and I guess 5, maybe 6, each of them dealing with the buildings, and then I tick off in my head, oh, what building would I like you to do next? And I'm thinking, oh, the Flatiron for me, and then the Sherry Netherland is one that I would love to do.
Oh, that's a good one. Those are the Flatiron comes up a lot, but the Sherry Netherland is not. That's interesting.
I like the Sherry Netherland because the penthouse looks almost like it shouldn't even be there. And then the Fabergé eggs for so long, which aren't there anymore, on the bottom floor.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. It is a beautiful building. Absolutely. Yeah.
It's very different. And then of course, you talk about the plaza here, and that would be another one to just explore completely.
Yeah, I have a short, there's an audiobook coming out next year that I co-wrote that will feature the plaza. So that will be fun. It's called The Gimlet Slip, and it's Prohibition era New York City. And it's a novella that will be an audiobook and then an ebook.
So is it like one of those Amazon, I mean, one of those Kindle, whatever they
Yes.
call it? Yeah, okay. What's it called? The Gimlet?
The Gimlet Slip, which is a car maneuver for when you're being chased by the police and you're a bootlegger.
I have so many memories of the plaza. I wish it hadn't changed. But one time I was there with my ex-wife and my daughter, who we adopted from China. She was like 3 years old. But there was also a sheik or some Arab prince who was there. He'd taken the whole floor, and in front of his door was a long table with two of his servants, whatever, with Kalashnikov rifles. But they made friends with Samantha, and she just sat there with them all day, and they just talked and played with her, with these semi-automatic guns on either side of her.
Oh man, that's a great story. What a great story for her to tell, you know, as she grows up. That's incredible. Wow.
Yeah. It's just you know how you walk in, well, obviously you do. You walk into certain places and you automatically have this feeling. I'm not that much of a spiritual person, but you walk into a place and it's just right.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, for sure. For sure. I mean, I'd love to do, you know, something in London, one of those old buildings there. That would be fun to set something in.
I don't think you're ever going to leave New York.
Well, the next book is not. The next book is at the Met Museum. So that's a given. Yeah. So that'll come out in it looks like maybe January of 2025. I do about a year and a half in between books now. And so yeah, I'm just kind of working on the first draft now and seeing what comes up.
Yeah, it's interesting because pretty much all writers don't have this storehouse of possible stories. And you do, you know, that's what you could live to be 200 years old and still have not covered all the building.
I know, I joke around, I'll be doing like the gas station on the corner of 11th Avenue, you know.
Well, that's a good story. There aren't any why are there only 2 gas stations?
Right. The last gas station in New York.
That'd be a good movie.
It would be. That really would be.
Yeah. So Marion, in her adventures, especially as the denouement of the book occurs, how do you go about, I don't know how you do it. How do you bring all the skeins of the story together? Because you always do. In this case, like I said, 3, 4 different ones.
Yeah. Yeah. And this book's a little different because a lot of my books are dual timeline, that's really tricky to have, you know, to put 2 timelines together. This one does, but it's more, you know, it's older Marion in 1992 looking back on her life. So it's the same character, which makes it a little easier to pull everything together.
Oh, well, that's one of the things that I want to talk about because it's kind of in the book and it's not really a spoiler, is Parkinson's disease. Because last night, I watched that documentary Still of Michael J. Fox.
Yes. Yeah. Michael J. Fox. It's incredible.
Especially that last scene where he's just looking at you.
Yeah.
And he's still.
Yes.
So talk about that, how it's in the book.
Yeah. You know, in August of 2020, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's and I was very shocked. It was just a tremor in my right hand. And I'm really lucky in that the medication works really well for me at the moment. But it is a, you know, degenerative disease. It's going to get worse. And so I just kind of handled it the way I handle writing a book, where I did a lot of research and talked to a lot of people who had it and just got to know what it was about. And, you know, I think everybody has something that they're dealing with. So, you know, Parkinson's is my, you know, thing. But when I talked to people, I noticed that a lot of people didn't tell anyone because they didn't want to seem old or they didn't want to lose their job. And it made me, it reminded me of breast cancer back 30 or 40 years ago, back when women never talked about it. And now, of course, breast cancer is just this huge force for research and funding. And so I thought it was important to step up and say, yep, I have Parkinson's. This is what it looks like. I'm doing fine. but there's a lot of us out there. There's a million people who have it. And I think there's power in numbers. And Michael J. Fox, of course, is just leading the charge. And there's so many breakthroughs and there's so much going on that, it's an exciting time to have Parkinson's, to be honest. It's, if you're ever going to get it, now's the time, because I think we're at the cusp of some really wonderful things. So I explored a little bit in this book, and I just wanted to bring that out as I was touring around and talking about this book, because I just got back from a 2-week tour, and it's been incredible the number of people have come up to me after and said, yep, I have it, or my husband has it, and just be able to make a connection, because I think it's a very lonely experience if you don't have that.
Yeah, of course, what your books do is I looked up everybody living who's famous who has Parkinson's as soon as you talked about it. And it is amazing because you wouldn't know, and it's much easier now. And I've always thought, even raising my kids, that it's much better to tell them the truth about everything.
Yeah.
Which goes back to Simon.
It does, doesn't it? And that's the thing, I've talked to people who they didn't tell their grown kids for a long time. And these are grown kids, not young ones, because they just didn't want them to know. And I think keeping something like that in is so hard. And keeping a secret, trying to not shake when your hand is shaking, and, to try and suppress that and hide that. And just why add that on to your battle when you have enough on your plate?
And in addition to raising this enormous amount of money that Michael J. Fox has, the best thing about the way he handles his sense of humor, especially the 2 episodes of Curb Your Enthusiasm like 10 years ago,
Yes,
are hilarious. But yeah, even and he he wants to laugh more, he just can't. But you can see in his eyes that he's laughing.
yeah, and that's the thing. One of the scary things about Parkinson's is at a certain point you lose your ability to make expressions or to smile. And for an entertainer, that's the worst. But his energy is so boyish still, and still very much Michael J. Fox, that it comes out even if he can't make a huge smile anymore.
Yeah, I guess it might have been in New York where some woman says hello to him and then he falls over and he says to her, wow, you really knocked me over.
Knock me off my feet.
Right,
You have to have humor. You absolutely do. And there's a lot of laughs to be had, to be honest.
Yeah. I think that's one of the best ways to stave off every disease, or to stave off death. But
Yeah.
my mom did that, and that's why she made it to 96.
There we go. I love it.
She laughed at death. Death gets pissed off when you do that. I feel. Well, as always, it's been wonderful talking to you. And I usually would say, oh, what's like Terry Gross? I'd say, what's your next book going to be about? But now I know what your next book is going to be about. And I know what your next short story is going to be about too.
Yeah. So you're in the loop now. Now you know everything I'm doing for the next year and a half.
Yeah, I'll just put on my calendar to have Carrie call your publicist in a year and a half.
Yes. Perfect. I would love that.
Me too. Thanks again.
And thank you for having me. This has been great.
I agree. I always love talking to you.